I have something I'd like to share with you. We just finished the series on Exodus, and that's sort of what I'm calling this next series. And looking at, as we normally go through different books, and we kind of between two, we got about 7 weeks till JBU students come back. And I was thinking about what kind of series we would want between Exodus and the next series. I just wanted to hear from people's hearts. And so I've titled this series, Here's What I Would Like to Share with New Heights Siloam. And some of the people that I talked with had a passage of scripture that they've been diving into, and they just have some things they want to share, like Mark Hansen next week. For some people, there was like a topic that just particularly related to us that they want to share. And so for the next 7 weeks, there's not really going to be a flow or unity other than the fact that you're going to hear different people speak from their heart. Here's what I really want to share with New Heights Siloam. And what I want to share with you this morning is I absolutely love our mission statement. To love God passionately and to love people tangibly. I love that. It's simple. It radiates the greatest commands that Christ gave to us. I love the descriptive words that's not on my shirt. Passion and tangibly. We have a passion for God, and we want to not just love people, we want to do it in such a way that they know that we love those people. And so with those thoughts in mind, my mind went to John chapter 13. And we're going to look at the passage in John chapter 13. It begins in verse 1. It was just before the Passover feast, and Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And when I first read that, the thing that jumped out at me was the full extent of his love. Now, if I would have asked you before this, how did Jesus show the full extent of his love? I think most of you would have said probably at the cross. Or maybe from the cross and through his resurrection. I'm not sure any of you had said this story where Jesus is going to wash the disciples' feet. And through this, he shows the full extent of his love. Now, I'm not the Greek scholar that Jason is, but I just kind of really dived into the telos, if any of you are familiar with that, is the word that's used there, and it's usually translated end. And so I'm sure some of your versions don't even have that. They would say, show them his love to the end, but there's something more than that. There's something more than just the end. It's not like Jesus showed that he loved them until the end, and then he was done loving them. Well, no, that doesn't make sense at all, does it? Now, that's not what he's meaning. There's an aspect of completeness. There's an aspect of full. I can't stop it. It's my nature. It's who I am. So if we look at the cross and it's like a wow, John is saying, yeah, that's the moment, but there's so much more. And so this story of washing the feet is like a wowier moment. You like that word? I love making up words. It's not just, wow, God's love for us or Jesus' love for us. It's like this is even a wowier. There's so much more to that. I tell you what, can you say that with me? Wowier? 1, 2, 3. Wowier. It's like this is just so amazing. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper just to look at all the specifics. If you've heard this story before, you haven't heard this story before. There is so much here. We're going to look at 3 things this morning. Number 1, what he knew, what he taught, or what he did, and then what he taught. Because the first thing we're looking at is what he knew. John's the only one that records this particular story, and he is very specific in telling us 5 things that Jesus knew when he washed the disciples' feet. The first thing he knew is found in this verse. Jesus knew the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. He knew he was about to die. Would that change anything? Would that change your day today if you knew that this is the night before his death? So tomorrow, by 3 p.m., you'll be dead. Would that change your day? If you knew without any doubt whatsoever, if I'm a prophet and there's 100% this is true, in 60 seconds, the roof is going to collapse. And anyone in here will not survive. If you knew that without any doubts whatsoever, 50 seconds. 40. You wouldn't be staying here if you really knew that was going to happen. In fact, there's some of you that's just a little bit nervous knowing that's not going to happen, but I planted that seed in your mind, so there's kind of some nervousness there. Can you imagine what it'd be like knowing that tomorrow, what would you be doing? What would your life? By 3 o'clock, that's the end of your life. First thing that comes to my mind, let me wash some people's feet. Not exactly. You know, I kind of pictured a bride on her wedding day. You know, everything kind of surrounds the bride, not the groom, the bride. You know, when I do weddings, I tell them, you know, where you stand, where your eyes are is always where the bride is. This is her day. This is her focus. And in far, far greater way, I mean, this is the moment. This is the time. This is the greatest thing that has ever happened or ever will happen in all of time on this earth is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and it's going to happen tomorrow from this story. And yet Jesus, knowing this is happening, is still going to wash feet. Or in his hands. Verse 3, he also knew that the Father put all things under his power, or in his hands. It's not disguised from him. He knows he has all power. What would you do if you had all power? What would you do? That's why God hasn't given you all power. But these all-powerful hands that created the world, hands that have all power, these all-powerful hands are going to wash feet. We're also told in verse 3, he knew that he had come from God. Again, this is not something disguised. John wants to make sure that we understand this is the Son of God, and he knows it. He knows that he's God. There's not kind of some memory block at this point in time while he's human. He knows. He knows. This is the one that created the world in the heavens. This is the one things created through him. This is the one who is ruled in the heavens. This is the one whom the angels bow down to. This is God. And he's going to wash feet. And the fifth thing that he knew is actually found later in the chapter, or no, I missed one. Jesus knew he was returning to God. He knew he was about to go. He knew in just a short period of time after the death, he's going home with the Father. What are you like the last day of work before vacation? Where's your mind? Where's your mind the last day of school? Man, I want to do this just right. I want to learn as much and everything that I can. No, it's called clock watching day. Imagine what it'd be like tomorrow. I'm going to see God. Tomorrow I'm going to be back with him. Tomorrow I'm going to be surrounded by this place that I've been through in all eternity. For me, not for Jesus, but for me, it would be hard not to just be focusing totally on that, about what's to come instead of where I am. And then the fifth thing that's known a little bit later in the chapter, at verse 11, for he knew who was going to betray him. And we'll talk more about that after a bit when we talk about Judas, but he knew which one. So John takes this time to kind of point out all these things that Jesus knew before he washed feet. He knows he's about to die. He knows he has all power. He knows he comes from God. He knows returning to God. And knowing all those things, this is what he did. So he got up from the meal and he took off his outer clothing and he wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. What's he doing? Washing feet. Seems like the best way to illustrate what is taking place here is to have a foot washing, right? So I'm going to bring out some water and a towel, and what I need is for a volunteer to wash my feet. Who would be willing to do that? Can I see your hands? Thank you. I knew that there would be some because we have some great servants in there. I knew that we would have some who would point at others. They'll do it. How about who wants to go out for lunch afterwards? I'm buying. Yeah, I got more hands with that one. Yeah, let's go have fun. Let's go have a good time. Let's do something enjoyable, but washing feet? I'm not sure I want to do that. That just doesn't sound enjoyable. That doesn't sound fun. And Peter was very much aware of that. In verse 6, he came to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? The master said, this is not right at all. The master should not be washing the feet. That was a servant's job. This just isn't right. Something amazing is taking place here that sometimes it's hard for you and I in our culture to really understand this. And so I want to try to explain it more by looking at 6 feet. Brian's, Peter's, and Judas. Now, do you remember Brian the apostle? No? Brian is a friend of mine growing up, one of my best friends growing up. And Brian's dad was a landscaper. And this took place probably somewhere around 5th grade. And Brian would often help his dad after school and whatnot. And we had a Wednesday night Bible study. His dad was always sure that they were all there for the Bible study. So sometimes they would come just from the landscaping to Bible class. And that's what happened this night when Brian came in to Bible class. Now, our teacher was Mrs. Norton. Mrs. Norton was the pastor's wife. Mrs. Norton was elderly woman, white-haired. For a 5th grader, she was at least 204 years old. And we had a high amount of respect for Mrs. Norton, and she was teaching us this story, and we had the coolest Bible class building. It was a classroom that the church had bought, and in our classroom was a bathroom. And so she went in and she brought out some water and a towel, and she told all these 5th graders, take off one sock and one shoe. I'm going to wash your foot. Now I felt like Peter. This isn't right. This should not be happening. But Mrs. Norton insisted, and she went around to all of us, and she washed our feet. And the last person was Brian. And Brian tried to refuse. They said, no, that's okay. I'm fine. Mrs. Norton insisted. And so Brian took off a shoe and his socks, and it was obvious that he had been out landscaping in the dirt because his foot was filthy. And Mrs. Norton took one look at that foot and she washed it. Water had all turned muddy, and we were all thankful that Brian was the last one to get his foot washed. And she washed it clean. And I just, this is that side of me. I have to tell you this story. I actually went home one time to my home church where I grew up. Went back for a funeral in the local area. I popped in on a Sunday night. We had Sunday night services at that time, and one of the elders said, "Hey, our preacher's sick. You're preaching tonight," which I thought was funny, and I laughed. Until he got up to make announcements, and he said, "Tim's our guest speaker tonight." I had nothing prepared. But in that story, I told this story about Brian. What I didn't realize was that Brian's mother never knew that, and that was the first time that she had heard that story about Brian. So he still got in trouble in his 30s, which I thought was pretty cool for that. But it was just a visual illustration for me of the type of feet that Jesus washed. For most of you, if you would take off your sock and your shoe, some of us have stinky feet, but it looks fairly clean. Even those of you who are not wearing socks and some kind of sandals, your socks or your sandals are protecting your feet, so your feet are fairly clean. What kind of road did these people walk on for the most part? Dirt, in sandals. You just picture. So why this even foot washing? Because it was something that was needed in that culture. And so when Jesus stoops down and washes the feet of the apostles, these are truly dirty, stinking feet. And so he's washing Andrew's, and he's washing Bartholomew's, and he comes to Peter. And Peter said, "No. You shall never wash my feet," Jesus answered. "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Isn't that typical Peter? One verse, "You will never wash my feet." Next verse, "Wash my feet and my hands and my head." Do you know any difficult people in life? Let's not get back to the pointing of fingers. You know any difficult people in life? I'm just kind of picturing this with Jesus, and I'm putting myself in there, and that doesn't count because here's where I don't shine. I'm thinking tomorrow I'm dying. Tomorrow they're going to crucify me. I mean, the scourge, the sin, all this stuff, and Peter, just get your feet in the water and let's get this done. That's me. Quit being difficult. And I don't see that at all. I don't see Jesus complaining. He's just explaining. And he washes Peter's feet. So he washes dirty, stinking feet, but he also washes difficult feet. And then he comes to Judas. Verse 18, he says, "I'm not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fulfill the scripture, he who shares my bread and has lifted up his heel against me." Jesus knows exactly who Judas is. Verse 11, he also specifically, he knows who's going to betray him. So if you could, again, they didn't necessarily use chairs at that time. We're washing Andrew, washing Bartholomew. We're washing Peter, and Peter just being Peter, just being himself, being difficult, being a challenge. So we're watching Thaddeus, and then we got John, and we come to Judas. And Jesus is down on the floor. He's got his basin, he's got his towel. And I kind of picture him looking up into the eyes of Judas. And what do you do? Do you pass on that one? I know what you're going to do. Your feet don't get washed. Well, I know that doesn't happen because later on when Jesus says this, they're all like, man, who would that be? Nobody says, it's Judas. He skipped his feet. Or did you see the way he washed his feet? Tells me Jesus didn't treat Judas any differently than anybody else. How do you wash Judas's feet? I heard one guy say one time, yeah, I'd have washed his feet, man. I'd have scrubbed the hide off of them. No, there's no difference in anybody else. Just think about that for just a moment. Jesus washes the feet of dirty, stinking disciples. He washes difficult feet. And he washes feet that will betray him, sell him 30 pieces of silver. How do you do that? Which of them? The disciples stared at one another at a loss to know which of them he meant. Which one? Which one's going to betray? They have no clue. The disciples are just somewhat confused at all this and what just happened. Knowing what I know now becomes even more confusing. Because in my Bible, I wrote, those subtitles, Jesus washes feet. I wrote in God washes feet. Isn't that who he is? Can you even begin to imagine that? God shows up right here, right now. God standing right up here, and he points at you, and he says, come here. What are you thinking? Thinking, uh-oh. Uh-oh. Are you thinking, well, I don't know what you're thinking. He says, come up right here, have a seat. Take off your socks and shoes. God is saying this. What are you thinking? You becoming a Peter? Oh, no, Lord. No, this is not the way it works. I'll wash your feet. Do you understand the wowier moment here? Jesus knowing who he is. He is God. He is the Son of God. I mean, I still wrestle with the fact that he would die for me. Now I'm wrestling with washing my feet. What kind of love does this God have? Wow. He did all that, and then he says, here's what I want you to learn. When he'd finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. Do you? Do you really understand what just took place? Yeah, I've tried to go into greater detail to give us a greater understanding of what exactly took place here. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is who I am. Lord, teacher. Now that he's going to emphasize it, your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I'm just curious. Did Andrew look over at Thaddeus and like, I have to wash his feet? Might be the same reaction when you look around the room and saying, wash their feet? You know, there might be, okay, I wouldn't mind. I've washed my wife's feet before. I could do that. I've washed Jesse and Rachel's feet before. I could do that. But there's some of you that are just a little bit difficult. There's some of you that I just really wonder about. And I say that in jest, and I'm glad you're smiling. But you know difficult people. And you know sinful people. And you know betrayal people. You can't do that unless you first understand what Jesus did for you. I tell you the truth that no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Now you know. Do you know? Again, you can't do this, people. You cannot love people tangibly until you understand love God passionately. And God passionately loves you. Once you understand that, it becomes a whole lot easier to love the difficult people. So we need to wash the apostles' feet because there's people out there who need it. We need to wash Peter's feet because even though they're difficult, they still need it. And we need to wash Judas's feet. People who are going to abuse our love. But that didn't stop Jesus. So later on in this discourse to his disciples, he says this: a new command that I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And by this, all of Siloam Springs will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It's one of the things that I absolutely love about New Heights. I love being loved here. I love the way you love this community and have been tangible in your serving. I talk all the time about this is a church that one Sunday morning, several Sunday mornings, didn't meet for worship service. We met and sang a song and prayed, and then we served the community. We painted the rails of the park. We cleaned up a cemetery. We helped. You remember the story of the lady who woke up that morning and said, God, I don't know what I'm going to eat today. I've got nothing in the house. And as she's praying, there's a knock on the door. It was one of our serving Sundays. And one of our members and child was at the door with a basket of food. And she said, God, you knew what I was going to eat today, didn't you? It's right there. I love the church for that. You understand how far God's love went, though? Then love them. Then love them. To me, it's not just a wow moment, it's a wowier moment. Can you say that with me one more time? 1, 2, 3, wowier. And I do those silly things because sometimes that's what sticks in your mind and it might remember the lesson better. But we need wowier moments to understand just more and more how amazing God's love is for me, which motivates me to love him even more passionately and to find some people that I can love tangibly. The beginning of this chapter in John 13 and verse 1, it says, now he's about to partake of the Passover. And this whole discourse, he's having the Passover with his apostles, which leads into what we call communion or the Lord's Supper. And if you look at the Passover and you look at the Lord's Supper, there's one component that is vastly missing in our communion time. It's the bitter herbs. How many of you have ever been part of a reenactment had taken place in like several of you. I love doing that. It's just a real learning experience, except every time I don't look forward to the bitter herbs. Usually when I've partaken of it, we use horseradish. Some of you like that stuff, and I don't know what's wrong with you. It's just bitter and nasty stuff. And yet it was a part of Passover. So why isn't it a part of communion? Because Jesus took that part on the cross. And so in just a moment, we're going to dismiss you to go in the back and have a piece of bread and a cup of juice that reminds us of the sacrifice of Christ. But it's not a bitterness. Was his death bitter? Absolutely. But to remember it, we're not remembering the bitterness, we're remembering what came from that. And that's the celebration. And so, as we sing this song, looks like we do have dismissers. They're going to be dismissed by rows to go back and partake of communion. And you can take it in the back, you can take it outside, wherever you want to. You can take it by yourself, you can group up with people. But I just encourage you to just celebrate the wowier moments of God's love for you.